Welcome back, everybody. Kevin, Sully, and Gordon Mack here with you on Tuesday, one day after we got the news about Shelby Houlihan's positive drug test that's going to keep her out of the Olympics, out of the Olympic trials, and banned for the next 4 years. We're going to play the entirety of the press conference at the end of this video, but up front, Gordon, I want to give our thoughts and our reactions. So, Gordon, I'll kick it over to you to start. You were in the press conference yesterday with Shelby, her coaches, and a lawyer. What was your reaction just sitting through that press conference?
Yeah, it was a very first time, very unique reaction. I had never seen Shelby, Jerry, Shalane in this mindset, this mood, this feeling. They were very like saddened and angry. It was a very weird Zoom call. I can tell you that. And we didn't find out about this press conference until 2 hours beforehand. Mm-hmm. And the email they sent said Shelby's going to make a statement on the Olympic trials, and we start thinking like, what's going on? Why are they making a statement? They don't do press conferences. Is she telling us she's hurt? Maybe, but that's weird to do a press conference about that. We didn't know. We're trying to figure out what this so-called press conference was going to be about, and then as soon as the Zoom meeting turned on and we saw all their faces, we're like, oh, this isn't good. This is something serious. And then their lawyer started talking in the beginning and started going down the roads that there's some positive test situation that they're dealing with. And I thought they were trying to get ahead of bad news and be like, hey, it's all cool. She's cleared now. Just want to let you know there was this whole tainted pork situation. But then the lawyer just casually says, and she's banned for 4 years. And we're like, wait, so this is like already decided. They already went through the appeal process. Like, this is a known thing. And Shelby Houlihan's career is basically, her prime is basically now gone. And I was kind of in shock for the first 5 minutes of that press conference, thinking like, this can't be real. What is going on? Up is down, left is right. So that was my first reaction. What was your first reaction when they started the press conference?
Yeah, the 4-year thing jumped out because then I became aware, hey, we're looking at this at the end of the process, not at the beginning or the middle. And so many times when these sort of cases come up, when it comes to anti-doping, something happens early on and we hear about it prior to the athlete appealing to the Court of Arbitration of Sport. But we soon found out that this was very different. Just to run through the timeline a bit here, Shelby's last race was December 4th, 2020. She gave a sample on December 15th. On January 14th, AIU, and it's important to remember this is AIU and not a USADA investigation in case, they notified her that her sample tested positive for nandrolone. She was charged in mid-May, and that was after a long period of time, and Shelby and her lawyer and Jerry attest that that was only after they forced the IIU to take her out of that purgatory that she was in and just charge her because she had been provisionally suspended for all those months. So eventually they do charge her in mid-May. They tried to expedite the process. They went right to a single hearing to appeal it in the first week of June. They have the emergency hearing, and then June 11th, just a few days ago, Gordon, is when the decision from CAS comes out. It was unsuccessful and now facing a 4-year ban. What jumped out to me was just the passion with which Jerry Schumacher in particular spoke. He's a person of few words. While he was talking, I just wrote down some of the quotes that stuck out to me. He said this eroded all of his faith in the anti-doping process. He says it was a friendly fire casualty that is, in the war on doping are acceptable. He said, quote, how many lambs were led to the slaughter? He called it a great tragedy in the history of American distance running. And Shalane Flanagan said we're living in a nightmare, and she reflected on her own experience losing out on medals to dopers. And she said, hey, look, I'm all for the clean sport. And this is something that's been echoed by a lot of Shelby's teammates. You're seeing the but inserted there. I'm all for a clean sport, but if it means that an innocent athlete is going to be convicted of something they couldn't do, we just can't do that. The system cannot hold if it's going to allow an innocent athlete to face punishment. Doesn't matter. You can let guilty people go free, but the threshold needs to be such that innocent athletes are protected. So, I mean, we can get more into the details here. They hired a private investigator, took a polygraph test. I know right now on Twitter and on the internet, we have everybody who's now an expert into how much nandrolone exists in pork, especially on, what was it, uncastrated calves. I mean, it just got very, very granular very, very quickly. Their assertion, Shelby's team's assertion is, this was like one lab director on their own making this judgment, and they did not get any second opinions on it. And that decision was just carried through. We do not have the CAS decision yet. Just this morning, AIU announced it, but obviously that's after Shelby had already made the statement. So really, we're just waiting on this CAS statement to get the other side. We do not know what their point of view is in terms of why this was not seen as an inadvertent positive test, because Shelby is certainly making a strong argument that it was.
Yeah, and the big thing that I took away from the whole press conference is when I hear the positive tests and the athlete's defense being it's because of it was in a food that I ate, you think back to multiple other situations that have happened with U.S. athletes, notably Ajay Wilson, who got her indoor American record taken away because of tainted beef. Also, Jaren Lawson, who had a 4-year suspension, reduced to 2 years because he finally got cleared. And you think like, okay, what's the difference or the similarity between those cases? They both it was not on purpose. They got it from tainted food. Is Shelby's the same? Why is it not being treated the same way Ajay Wilson was treated? Why is Shelby not being treated the same way Jaren is treated? Or why isn't Jaren and Ajay being treated the way Shelby's treated, right? Why did they get off and Shelby isn't? Like, it could go both ways. And the problem with just society and human thoughts and brains is that we're never going to really know the truth, right? Because it's all going to be your word versus their word. And no matter how much you can know an athlete and trust an athlete, you never truly know 100.000% the truth. And so that's what's frustrating about this, is because, there might be a part of you who wants to be like, oh, Shelby, you're being screwed over. And there's also a part of you that's like, well, maybe I'm being screwed over. Maybe I'm being lied to, right? And I'm not saying that that's what they're doing, but it's a casualty of the situation is that we're never going to know the absolute truth. And I saw a tweet, I think by Tim Layden, and it's like, it's a tragedy in both ways. It's a tragedy if Shelby Houlihan is guilty, because that is just awful, because she was one of the star athletes in our sport and she was cheating. It's also a tragedy if she's not guilty and her stardom is being taken away from her with unfairly. Both are tragedies, and we're in one of the stories. We just don't know what story we're in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. To answer your question, because it was something that I posed to the attorney Paul Green, because he represented those athletes that you spoke of, and he said Ajay Wilson's case was handled by USADA and not by AIU WADA, which Jerry and the attorney went out of their way to be very complimentary. I don't know if you noticed this about USADA, and then drew like a very thick line between the domestic anti-doping agency and their foreign counterparts. The other part, he said, with Jaren Lawson, he said that one was handled internationally, but he said that was a long process. It took a lot of time in court, and he had a 4-year ban. He served 2 of it before the case got thrown out. So he essentially got a 2-year ban, even though the case was thrown out. And as I mentioned, we're just so far along in the process. The only step left here for Shelby is to appeal to the Swiss tribunal, which is going to take months, they said, because they need to hire a lawyer in Switzerland. So at the very least, she's going to obviously miss the trials this week. I guess the earliest possible reinstatement could be for next season. But when you start talking about reputational damage, this is a major deal, even if things get rescinded, because yeah, you're right. We don't know 100%, even without positive tests, right? Even without missed tests, a person could, because of the state of track and field and in sports in general, there's always going to be suspicions, and fans and the public have been burned a bunch of times. So the reaction naturally is going to be from a certain segment to never trust anything. So even if every test was positive or negative, you would still find people who were skeptical. But then given a positive test, people are going to just completely take it and run with it as far as they can go.
And also, it's interesting seeing. I mean, this may be taboo to talk about, but people like to commentate on the reaction to the news, right? When Alberto Salazar was going through the situation, he's currently still fighting his 4-year ban. Apparently, what is that going to be settled soon? I don't know, but there was a lot of backlash towards the Nike Oregon project with what they were doing. There was documentaries being made. There was just a lot of hashtags and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Towards Salazar. Shelby, it's a little different. There's a lot more support. Then you have the different ways people look at like Christian Coleman's case. There's a lot of sprinters kind of rally around Coleman as like he made a mistake, but it wasn't. It's not a suspicious mistake. It's just a mental mistake. You had the way people react to the Justin Gatlin type of thing, because Justin Gatlin still has maintained his innocence, even though he's served his 4-year ban. There's just a lot of pick and choose how you're going to react to whenever a star athlete is banned or a ban is lifted. And it's just kind of fascinating to see the way track and field world, from the sprinter side to the American side to the international side to the distance side, have a different take based on who is behind the sword.
Yeah. Yeah. And they listed all those athletes, right? They talked about Brendan Martinez's case as well. And they talked about the reforms that USADA was trying to undergo to make the process better. And maybe this will change, because I know recently, it's become common for athletes to advocate for lifetime bans on the first offense, right? It's been common for, as soon as an athlete gets mentioned, it's get him out of here, get him out of the sport forever. Well, it's easier to do that if you don't know that athlete personally or you don't relate to that athlete. And then here with Shelby, I think a lot of people who would take that point of view ordinarily are making that argument. You mentioned the reaction, though, and it's interesting. You can find whatever reaction you want because it's 2021 and the internet, right? You can find people who 100% think she's guilty, and then you can find people who are 100% think she's innocent, and then you can find people complaining about the other people and why are there not more people
on their side,
on my side. I do want to take this moment just to mention, just to discuss and add a little bit of context around 3 things I've seen crop up in terms of why people think she's guilty and that this whole story isn't going to hold water. And one of them is the idea that she's had some late career breakthrough. I don't know why this is popping up. I mean, she smashed the 4-minute barrier when she was 25. Have we decided that 25 is now late in your career? Gordon, did I miss that at some point?
I've done the math. The prime of someone's career is age 22 to 26.
Okay. So
it's right,
you've done
the prime.
And again, this isn't admissible evidence into court either way, but it's just people run the same playbook every time there's a positive. And I'm saying not every situation is the same. So to say that she had a break, I mean, she was an NCAA champion too, but this wasn't someone who walked off of the street and started running fast. Like, she's been fast for a while. The other thing, Jerry Schumacher, in his statement that he read and his statement that he released, said that he didn't even know what the substance was, not even familiar with nandrolone. So now I have a whole bunch of people saying, well, that's not believable. How could he never know what nandrolone is? I don't know, because it's a drug that was popular in the 80s and 90s, and Jerry Schumacher's not starting his day refreshing the list of like what steroids people took. Like, to me, saying that shatters his credibility, I think isn't really being intellectually honest with what you know or don't know about Jerry Schumacher's habits or consumption of information. Like, is it reasonable to expect that every track coach has to be intimately familiar with every substance? And if they say they're not, then that's a sign of something nefarious.
Yeah. The only drug that you should know is like testosterone.
EPO. If he said he didn't know about EPO, yes, that would have been a strange thing. Okay. And this last point I want to touch on in terms of the criticisms that I'm hearing. And this kind of dovetails into why this case was different than the others that we've talked about recently, at least. And we've talked about a lot of whereabouts cases recently, right, Gordon? That's been the popular topic over the last year. And with whereabouts cases, there's a lot of room for a shade of gray here, right? You could say, hey, such and such isn't doping, but they didn't follow the rules, so they still deserve a ban, a suspension, right? And you can find some area in between. Did they do it or did they not do it? Meaning, did they do drugs or did they not do drugs? You can get them on this procedural violation, which we've seen. Okay. With Shelby, that doesn't really exist with this case, right? Either she ingested nandrolone, and I think they said it would have been an oral ingestion, not injected through the veins, or she got it through this burrito, right? There's no like, I kind of went afoul of the rules a little bit, so can we get leniency? That's not how this is set up, right? Right? Am I understanding that correctly? Is that how you interpret it? Okay.
Yeah.
So instead of people being able to deal with that dichotomy, what we've devolved into is, how dare she risk her career for a burrito from a food truck? And let me just explain food trucks if people don't understand. It's 2021. You can get high quality food in a food truck. An athlete should be able to have the expectation that they can go and eat at a food truck and not get a positive drug test, right? I know they're athletes. I know we have to hold them to higher standards. They have to identify whereabouts. They're not allowed to take this supplement or that supplement, everything like that. But come on, man. Like, we need to get a better system in place where an athlete is allowed to have a somewhat normal existence, like eating out of a food truck in Portland, Oregon, of which there are numerous food trucks, and not have the risk of testing positive. So they're trying to say that she was negligent here. And again, we don't know the full facts of the case, but I don't think you're not going to convince me or most of the people that's like, yeah, she really took a risk on her career. What was she doing eating a burrito? Like, come on. She's a human being too. She's allowed to eat food.
And then there's also the take of, this is maybe a pro Shelby take. I don't know if anti, but if you're WADA or USADA, if you're an anti-doping agency, do you get credit when you clear people or do you get credit when you catch people? It's like one of those things where, like, if anti-doping goes like 5 years of not catching anyone, are they doing a good job or a bad job? So, like, there might be a point where, like, it's more fun. It's not more fun. It's more encouraged to be stricter than more lenient, because the stricter you are, the more power you have of trying to encourage anti-doping, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you're constantly like, oh yeah, oh, burrito, okay, cool, you're good. Oh, you were at your other friend's house, no big deal, go on. And if you keep on just giving people passes and passes and passes, then you're not really have any purpose if you're just easily just a pushover. Yeah. So, and let's be honest, it looks good when you catch a very good athlete. Right. Maybe not look good, but it's like, oh wow, we are, no one is noticing when they stop the 20-year-old who never qualified for a U.S. final. Yeah. They will notice when they get the Olympic medalist type athlete. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, man. This whole thing, though, it messes with your head. You want to believe them. You also want to not believe them. It just sucks to think about it and how to handle what's right and what's wrong, because I just wish it was so obvious. I just wish people, when they get caught doping, it's like, yeah, I did it, I'm sorry. And they're like, all right, good, you're banned. You're sorry, but you're banned. Not this whole, like, it wasn't me, it was because of this. It just complicates the whole thing. On that same topic that you were discussing about WADA, Patrick Ruby, the journalist, said, doping control as we know it is much better at busting athletes who aren't trying to break the rules than those who are, which is an interesting perspective. And I think it's important to remember, all these agencies are run by people. The labs are run by human beings. The AIU, WADA, the people investigating the case, they're human beings. And we've seen mistakes get made all the time from human beings in this process, right? Like, there's been whereabouts things that have gone right where the athlete was caught and punished. There's been whereabouts situations where they've had to backtrack on, right? Like, this has happened time and time again. We just brought up, a couple cases here that got eventually thrown out when it comes to substances that were tainted. Again, I'm not saying that to say 100% that it's clear that, this fully exonerates her. All I'm saying is, if you're a type of person who's skeptical about people,
Well, you could be skeptical about people on both sides of this. You could be skeptical of these institutions as well, too, right? You don't need to just be skeptical of the athletes. And that's one of the questions I have moving forward is just, when are we going to see the CAS report? Was there an effort to I know with Lawson and maybe with Wilson too, they were able to trace the meat back. Like, how in depth are we going to get with it? And I wonder again, Gordon, is this going to change the perception of the anti-doping fight? Because with each case like this, does it lessen people's confidence? And again, we'll have to wait for the CAS report in pursuing people fairly and justly. Because if you have a system that's going to catch innocent people, you don't really have a system that people are going to believe in.
Yeah, and I also think if you also are going to preach that like doping, like hashtag clean sport, and be super in everyone's faces and get out of the sport. I hate you, Justin Gatlin, Christian Coleman. You shouldn't have missed your test. How it's not a brick can figure out how to update their whereabouts. Failure. If you're going to play that game, you're going to also die by the sword when you have someone that you think is innocent have to go through the same mud. So like we start creating this culture of like any association and zero association, and we get rid of the gray area, and now we have you kind of look like a fool. And my perspective is like whenever these situations have, I just kind of always have I just choose to never take a side. Like Christian Coleman, I was like, my side was, I don't think he's doping. I think he made a mistake. And I think, okay, Justin Gatlin, maybe he says he didn't do it, but hey, he followed the rules by taking the ban for 4 years. He took the punishment and now he's back. Like, I'm not going to yell at Justin Gatlin in 2017 for a ban that he served in 2010. Like, it makes no sense. But people like to make a doping allegation or positive theft and live with it your entire career. And I just think we need to stop this whole worship of the anti-doping world and just kind of use more nuance and look at people as human beings. Look at Coleman as a human being. Look at Gatlin as a human being. Look at Shelby as a human being. Look at the NOP as just human beings. Like, we're all humans, and some people lie and cheat. Some people get screwed over. Some people make mistakes. It's all nuance, and we need to start using it more in our sport and stop playing this whole my team versus your team. That's my own take.
Yeah, I think in general, it's just looking at each case individually and giving time for the process to play out in all of it before we go too far down any one road, which is why I hope we see the report and why I hope these things happen quicker. Like we saw the issue with Sully Nasser. She had the 3 missed tests before Doha, before she won a gold medal, but the process had not fully played out. So she was allowed to run. Now it turns out that thing got thrown out because they went to a wrong address and knocked on a door where there were gas canisters and not a person's apartment. So that got tossed out. Didn't end up mattering, I guess, in the long run. But it's like, we need to figure out a way to expedite, if at all possible, this process while still giving people the opportunity to present their case fully. I mean, you wonder, and this is a question I would have asked if we had more time, but you wonder if this was in the public domain a couple months earlier before the CAS ruling, if what would have changed, if anything at all, just in terms of the idea of public pressure, public sentiment being out there. We'll leave it there. So we're going to talk more about what this does, obviously, for Shelby's career and the 1,500 and 5,000 on the short term. We'll get more into that on Wednesday's podcast, but we'll leave it there for now, Gordon, and we will play so everybody can see the duration of the press conference yesterday featuring Shelby Houlihan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Pritt, and I'm here today on behalf of the Bowerman Track Club. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Before we start, I'd like to ask that everyone please refrain from tweeting or otherwise promoting the context of this press conference until its conclusion. Unfortunately, we are convening under very sad and, as you'll hear, unjust circumstances. To describe those circumstances, we're first going to hear from Paul Green, founder of Global Sports Advocates and one of the foremost sports attorneys in the world. Then Shelby Houlihan, Jerry Schumacher, and Shalane Flanagan all have statements to share. after which we will open things up to any and all questions you may have. So without further ado, here's Paul Green.
Thank you very much. So my name is Paul. I've grown to admire Shelby Houlihan tremendously over the last 4 or 5 months. I first heard from Shelby in January, and Shelby, I can tell you, having done these cases, hundreds if not thousands of cases involving anti-doping over the years, is an innocent athlete. She's the latest athlete to fall prey to environmental contamination. And in my view, what happened to her is entirely unjust. This result was going to live with me for the rest of my career, just because I know Shelby didn't do anything wrong and she's banned. And it's quite frankly just not only sad, but I think it undermines the entire anti-doping system, what happened in this case. Shelby tested positive for a substance called nandrolone back in January. The AIU did not announce it because nandrolone is not a straightforward analysis. It's an endogenous compound, which means it naturally occurs in the body. It's one of the hardest substances to figure out where it came from. It is both endogenous, meaning naturally occurring, and exogenous. And in fact, one of the ways that it endogenously occurs in the body is through food contamination, through eating pork. Certain types of pork, it is well known, have nandrolone in it. And in Shelby's case, she ate a burrito about 10 hours before from a Mexican restaurant that we concluded very, very early on contained pig organ meat. Pig organ meat is one of the sources for nandrolone. 10 hours before would have been perfect in terms of the timing of the level that was in Shelby's system, which is an extremely low level, very low. So low, in fact, that in my view, it became clear that it was impossible to distinguish where it came from. And the case should have been reported out as what's known as an atypical finding, meaning more investigation is required. But that isn't what happened. The lab decided it was exogenous, and I'll explain to you where I think that was the wrong determination with some science slides, and stuck to that analysis, never wavered. We told them 5 days in that we asked for her B sample analysis to be considered under some of the technical documents that actually contemplate this exact scenario from happening. And that analysis on her B sample was never recorded in the lab document package. We don't think that analysis was actually ever done. And here we sit. They came back and said she had exogenous nandrolone in her urine. And we don't believe there's any way. I know Shelby didn't have exogenous nandrolone in her urine, because the only way that could have happened is if Shelby would have taken an oral nandrolone supplement, which she did not do. She did not have an injection. That was clear because her next test 5 weeks later was clean. In fact, every test she's taken before or after was clean. She had this one abnormal test and that was it. So I'm just gonna see if I can share my screen here. Just show a few slides and then I'm happy to take some questions. Here we go. So again, this is an endogenous threshold compound. This is not a normal compound substance that is synthetic and appears in the urine. It's easy to detect. There's multiple ways this can show up in the urine. Pregnancy is one. We had Shelby take a pregnancy test. She was not pregnant. Pork consumption is another one. And 19-hour steroids administration, which would be taking it either orally or by way of injection, is another way. Shelby's ratio was 3.9 on her B sample. You can see these are mean ratios of a paper that was done by the professor in the lab that actually reported out her result as exogenous. Shelby's level was 3.9, nothing that was never considered as part of the analysis of her B sample. Further, this is a laboratory document that went into effect on April 1st, that was published on December 21st. Shelby's analysis was done in January, that specifically contemplates the idea of boar offal or pig offal consumption. It says, following the consumption of the edible parts of non-castrated male pigs, which is a boar. Boars are part of the food system in the United States. There aren't that many, but there's about 2% of pigs that are slaughtered are part of the boar, are part of the food system. It's legal to kill boars and put them in the food system. Anyway, it says if you're less than 10 nanograms, Shelby's level was 5. And if your what they call delta 13C value is between -15 and -25, Shelby's was -23. Basically, at that point, if an athlete invokes it, in our view, the section said there's no way to distinguish where it came from. if the consumption of edible parts of pigs is invoked, which we did on the 19th of January, this may be established based on pharmacokinetics. It actually says the urinary origin may not be established by GCC IRMS analysis. And that is exactly what they used for Shelby's case, only the GCC IRMS analysis. So we implored them to report this as an atypical finding, to test her again, to not ruin an innocent athlete based on one abnormal result that easily could have been explained by what we told them, but it fell on deaf ears. This would have been how an atypical finding would have been reported out. In the middle column, it's highlighted. Any factor preventing a reliable GCC IRMS analysis, and in our view, our evidence of her eating the burrito 10 hours before, the timing, the fact that she did not have an injection, all showed that it wasn't reliable based on her urinary markers. But again, this was ignored. This is where an atypical finding would have taken us. It would have been a report that would have led to a further investigation instead of leading to an anti-doping rule violation. Now, we had a hearing, an emergency hearing that was confidential, hoping that Shelby would win and this would not come out. Unfortunately, we lost. June 11th, the decision came out, and the AIU, I'm sure, will announce it now that we're having this press conference tomorrow. Anyway, it was going to come out this week, but Shelby's banned for 4 years. Her career is essentially over, and she didn't take a steroid. I can tell you that 100%. So, you know, there's been multiple studies done about this. Food contamination is a huge problem. These labs can detect now in the picogram range in parts per billion that they couldn't detect in the past, and they just don't know what to make of it. What are we doing with these parts per billion low-level findings by ruining people's lives instead of just being more circumspect about it and doing an atypical finding, which they could have done, and seeing what was really going on? So with that, I want you to hear from Shelby, and then I'm happy to take any questions. Was there a question asked?
No, Shelby is, what we're gonna do is we're gonna let Shelby and Jerry and Shalane make their statements, and then we will take questions after that. So Shelby, at this time, Shelby would like to share her statement.
Since I started running when I was 5 years old, I've had dreams of running professionally, setting records, winning an Olympic gold medal, and being one of the best in the world. I've always blindly believed that I was good enough to achieve those things. As I've gotten older, I've put in more time, I've put in more miles, I've become more dedicated, and I've learned to genuinely love this sport. It's what brings me the most joy, and it's where I feel the most me. I've always done it the right way. I've put my head down and I've just worked at being better year after year. I've stayed patient and I've trusted that the work and consistency would show. I still have all of the same dreams I had when I was 5, and I've been incredibly fortunate to have been able to achieve some of them. I still have others that I'm working towards. But the thing that truly drives me is the love and joy I get from what I do, and the curiosity to find out what my potential is. On January 14th, 2021, I received an email from the Athletics Integrity Unit, the AIU, informing me a drug testing sample that I provided on December 15th, 2020, has returned as an adverse analytical finding for a steroid called nandrolone, and that I was therefore subject to an immediate provisional suspension. When I got that email, I had to read it over about 10 times and Google what it was that I had just tested positive for. I've never even heard of nandrolone before. I've since learned that it has been long understood by WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, that eating pork can lead to a false positive for nandrolone, since certain types of pigs produce it naturally in high amounts. Pig organ meat, or pig offal, has the highest levels of nandrolone. In the following 5 days after being notified, I put together a food log of everything that I consumed the week of that December 15th test. We concluded that the most likely explanation was a burrito purchased and consumed approximately 10 hours before that drug test from an authentic Mexican food truck that happens to serve pig offal near my house in Beaverton, Oregon. I notified the AIU that I believe that this was the source. Although my levels were consistent with those of subjects in studies who were tested 10 hours after eating the source, and WADA technical guidelines require the lab to consider it when analyzing nandrolone, the lab never accounted for this possibility. They could have reported this as an atypical finding and followed up with further testing. The anti-doping experts I've reached out to say that they should have. I did everything I could to prove my innocence. I passed a polygraph test. I had my hair sampled by one of the world's foremost toxicologists. WADA agreed that test proved that there was no buildup of this substance in my body, which there would have been if I had been taking it regularly. Nothing moved the lab from their initial snap decision. Instead, they simply concluded that I was a cheater and that a steroid was ingested orally, but not regularly. I believe my explanation fits the facts much better because it's true. I also believed it was dismissed without proper due process. On June 11th, I received the news that the Court of Arbitration did not accept my explanation of what had occurred and has subsequently banned me from the sport for 4 years. I feel completely devastated, lost, broken, angry, confused, and betrayed by the very sport that I've loved and poured myself into just to see how good I was. I want to be very clear. I've never taken any performance enhancing substances, and that includes that of which I'm being accused. I believe in the sport, and I believe in pushing your body to the limit just to see where that limit is. I'm not interested in cheating. I don't do this for the accolades, money, or for people to know my name. I do this because I love it. I have so much fun doing it, and it's always the best part of my day. This sport means everything to me. I believe doping and cheating is weak. It shows a disbelief in yourself and not only shames you, but also shows a complete disregard for people that support you. I would never disrespect the sport, my competitors, my teammates, my coaches, my family, my fans, or myself in this way. I love and respect this sport too much. The drive that keeps me going is the curiosity to know how far I can push my natural limits and reach my potential. I've always wanted to be able to stand at the top of the Olympic podium with a gold medal around my neck, knowing that I did that. Now I'm not sure that I'll ever get the opportunity to truly pursue that dream. I'm going to continue to fight to prove my innocence. I will not sit down and accept a 4-year ban for something that I did not and I would never do. I absolutely respect and wholeheartedly support the fight to catch athletes who disrespect the sport by cheating and doping, but I'm not one of them. In the meantime, I ask for respect and privacy while I continue to navigate this stressful time. As devastating as this experience has been, I feel very fortunate to have such an amazing group of people that have been fighting alongside me and supporting me throughout this nightmare. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelby. At this time, Jerry Schumacher would like to share a statement.
Thank you, Shelby. That was very moving. This is a bit long, but I have a lot to say, so please bear with me. To the track and field community. In January of this year, I was notified that Shelby had recorded a positive drug test in December of 2020. The positive test was for a substance called nandrolone, something that neither Shelby nor I had ever heard of. Shelby was placed on a provisional suspension as we tried to understand how this test could have happened. Over the course of the past 6 months, I've learned more than I ever wanted to know about drug testing, about the procedures and organizations that govern our sport. What I've learned has eroded all the faith I had in their ability to fairly serve and protect clean athletes. Throughout this process, we were confident that the truth would lead to justice. What I've come to learn instead is that anti-doping authorities are okay with convicting innocent athletes so long as 9 out of 10 convictions are legitimate. That is wrong. It is my understanding that our drug testing technology is becoming so sensitive that anti-doping labs are catching increasing numbers of clean athletes. Shelby's positive test was for an exceedingly small amount of a substance that is known from WADA's own studies to be present in certain types of pork. Less than 12 hours after she ate at a Mexican food truck that served pig organ meat. I do not understand how any competent or unbiased body could fail to conclude that Shelby was innocent. Shelby was treated unfairly at every step of this process. The AIU refused to charge her for months despite no additional evidence being presented, opting to leave her in a provisionally suspended state until they were forced by Shelby's legal team to charge her and agree to a hearing before CAS so that Shelby could compete at the Olympic trials. I believe if this had been USADA handling her case, it would have been handled differently. At the very least, I'm confident she would have been treated fairly. Shelby, I know you, and I know the type of athlete you are, and far more importantly, the type of person you are. I don't have the words to articulate the depths of sadness I feel right now for you. I want you to know that you are not alone. I can only hope that in the coming days and weeks that you will feel supported by the very best aspect of our sport, that being the track and field community. To my coaching colleagues and friends in track and field, you are the ones who know me. You know me as a friend. You know me as a competitor. You know me as an imperfect and flawed human, but you also know how I feel about doping and know that I would never disrespect you by allowing or supporting it in any fashion. I will lean on you the most during this time because we have been gifted with an incredible opportunity to work with young, passionate people, and none of us should ever have to watch one of them go through something like this. It's now my understanding that friendly fire casualties in the war on doping are acceptable, and we should all be outraged by that. No clean athlete should ever have to go through what Shelby is right now, and we need to demand better for our athletes. To the clean athletes out there that I've coached against, you have every reason to be confused and distrustful of people in the sport. You are forced to witness and compete against dopers all the time. You are also led down roads of confusion that make you question everyone and everything. I understand. I do it too. All I can tell you is that I'm sorry this adds another layer of doubt. Shelby, your competitor, friend, and teammate, has had her entire career taken away from her for something she didn't do. Not all of you are going to believe me, and many of you are going to be skeptical. But to those that do, you should be outraged that this can happen. You should be outraged that the most powerful organizations in our sport are not protecting you. You should be outraged that it happened to Jerian Lawson, Ajay Wilson, Brenda Martinez, and now Shelby. You should be outraged that it can happen to you. You should demand better from your sport. You need to demand better from your sport. To the powerful organizations that can enact change, where are you? What are you doing? Why does this continue to happen to clean athletes? My understanding is that here in America, we come into contact with many contaminants that can lead to positive tests in our food, fluids, and supplements. It is also my understanding that USADA is aware of this and accounts for this in their analysis of each case. Yet Shelby is still in this position. To borrow a leading anti-doper's official response to me, how many lambs will be led to the slaughter before we address this issue? And finally, to the AIU and WADA, shame on you. Shame on you for not caring about the truth. Shame on you for using athletes in a political chess match. You got it very wrong this time, and that's not okay. It's not okay to be right 9 times out of 10 when you decide to execute someone's athletic life and dreams. You do not deserve this power. What we are witnessing here is a great tragedy in the history of American distance running. Not only is Shelby an exceptionally talented athlete, but she has also developed her talent through hard work and discipline. She is tough as nails. She is an exceptional teammate. She loves to compete. She just might be the best 1,500-meter runner in the world this year, but we will never get the opportunity to find out, and that is a tragedy. Over the past 6 months, I've learned that certain organizations in track and field have abandoned clean athletes. We need drug testing, and aggressive drug testing at that, to work towards cleaner sport. I will always support that, but the system is broken. It is a system that no longer protects clean athletes and instead ruins them. We can only assume that this will continue to happen if we, coaches and athletes, continue to accept it. I hope that we demand better from our sport because our athletes deserve it.
Thank you, Jerry. Finally, we'll have Shelby make her share her statement.
Thank you, Emily. I wrote this the other night. It's Saturday night, June 12th, 2021. I'm sitting in bed trying to put pen to paper with a broken heart, grieving over what was and what could have been. I am devastated. I am gutted. I am broken. I am overwhelmed. I am sad. I am angry. And I am so, so mad. Shelby Houlihan, formerly my teammate, now my athlete, who I consider like my little sister, has been convicted of a doping violation that removes her from the sport of track and field for 4 years. In December of 2020, she ate dinner from a local Portland food cart. She unknowingly ordered a burrito with meat that contained nandrolone. The following morning, Shelby was drug tested by the AIU. And the tests by water are now so sensitive that they pick up trace amounts of banned substances from unexpected sources. I have followed Shelby from high school in Iowa through the collegiate ranks at Arizona State, and then helped recruit her to BTC in 2015. We were teammates for 4 years before I became one of her mentors and coaches. In these years of training alongside Shelby, or coaching her trackside, I've had an up-close glimpse into this incredible young woman. Who is Shelby? From where I get to stand, she is a woman comfortable in her own skin, unapologetically dares to simply be herself. She is a kid. She is playful. She's a homebody. She has a smile that makes you want to smile. She has an obsession for everything Harry Potter and a deep affection for her cat, Miko, and her family. But ultimately, Shelby just really loves to run. With every fiber of my being, I know Shelby did not cheat and would never. All Shelby has ever wanted to find out in every workout and every race is how good she can be. We are living a nightmare that we can't seem to wake up from. And my concern is that if this tragedy can happen to us, then it can happen to you, coaches, and athletes. The guiding principle for myself and what I instill in my athletes is it's great to be fast, but it's better to be a great person. And Shelby is a great person. I'm desperately trying to understand why this has happened. How can this happen to an innocent person? How has the sport and governing bodies failed her and us so badly? How could we not protect her? I have experienced plenty of heartache in my own career. I've lost out on medals and dreams to those who cheat. But I would rather lose all my medals and wins to dopers than to witness one innocent athlete be robbed of a life that they have earned. If this is where the sport I love is headed, then I don't know if I can continue to be a part of it. I refuse to believe this is acceptable, and neither should you.
Thank you all for those statements. We're now going to open up the panel for questions. We feel really strongly that the more facts of Shelby's case are known, the more clear it will be to everyone that she's done absolutely nothing wrong and is being wrongly deprived of her career as an athlete. So to ask a question, please use the hand raising function on your Zoom, and we'll recognize one question at a time and allow you all to verbally ask your question. Sorry, 1 second. All right, Alison Wade, and when I allow you to speak, please identify your media outlet. Alison Wade.
Hi, I'm Alison Wade from Fast Women. I'm curious what your, sort of course of action is from here and what options you have as far as appealing this.
Hi, Alison. I'll answer that question. The way this case worked, normally it would be an initial hearing before the Athletics Integrity Unit panel, and then you'd have an appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. However, given the timing, because she was provisionally suspended for more than 3 months without being charged, and then we were right up against the Olympic trials, we agreed to a single hearing before CAS. And so with that hearing now being over, the appeal route left is to the Swiss Federal Tribunal in Lausanne.
Okay, Kara Goucher.
Hi, can you guys hear me? This is for Paul.
Hi,
Paul,
Kara.
I'm wondering why, if you were in front of CAS and you had, I'm assuming you had like the fax and the burrito receipt, why do you think it's just being ignored or fell on deaf ears?
You know, I always believe every single time when I go in that the truth will come out in a hearing, Kara. And I've never felt more strongly going into a hearing that we were able to get it across. It wasn't just the facts, it was clear what had happened in terms of her eating this 10 hours before. WADA's actually accounted for this in the technical documents. They're actually quite progressive on this. And it's not even an anti-doping rule violation. Typically with meat, you would have a violation, and then you just the determination would be what the sanction is, whether it's no fault or 4 years. Here, it wouldn't even be a violation. And so the burden technically was on them to prove it wasn't from meat. We don't know what happened because all we have is a one-page operative award. Again, it was because the timing was such that they couldn't put out a full reasoned award. It could take several months for that to come out, but we don't know the reasons why.
Kevin Sully.
Yeah, Kevin Sully from FloTrack. Can I get some more clarity on the timeline? What happened? Any communications between January 14th, which I believe Shelby said is when the AIU notified her, and then this past June 11th?
So January 14th is the initial notice that was provided by the AIU that her A sample had, as they reported it out, as exogenous, meaning synthetic, and therefore it was an adverse analytical finding. Within 5 days, we reported back on the 19th of January that we believe the source was this pig offal burrito, and we were asking them to do the B sample analysis and take this into account, which took place on the 22nd of January till the 26th of January. Then we got that B sample report came back in the end of January with no anywhere in the lab packet or the B sample test report that they'd actually accounted for it. But that under their view, the B confirmed the A, that was it. But But then it was several months. We went back and forth with them. We provided many submissions as to what happened. We hired a private investigator who went and got all sorts of food that we analyzed. We did a lot of stuff. We sent Shelby to go do the hair sample analysis, to do the polygraph exam. We hired our own expert who was a former water scientist from Europe. And his analysis was that it should have been an atypical finding under the technical documents. So we were hopeful all along, all the way up through April, that they would consider all this and drop the case. They didn't, and we filed with CAS to force them to charge her because they weren't doing anything. She was just sitting there provisionally suspended. Eventually, in May, they did charge her in mid-May because of what we did. We filed a CAS to force them to charge her, and they did. And then we eventually agreed to the single hearing before CAS, and we had the hearing on the week of the first week of June, and then the decision came out Friday.
John Gault.
Hi, my question is, what specific rules, either water rules, AIU procedures, do you guys believe need to be changed? And will you be like campaigning for this? Is this something that you guys will be taking steps and raising your voices to sort of to fix?
Jerry or Shalane, why don't you take that one, since I don't need to take every question.
Jerry, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, here's the bottom line. If we're in a system that is supposed to protect clean athletes, and instead these are the events that are happening, and I named 4 athletes just in the last few years that have gone through this exact scenario, it's broken. It doesn't work. I mean, tell me, I've got a team full of athletes now that are afraid to be tested. Who wants to be tested by WADA now? I mean, this is a crime against all these innocent and clean athletes. So am I going to scream from the top of my lungs? Yeah, absolutely. I hope all the other athletes and coaches do too. Otherwise, this will continue to happen. This is not, there's no excuse for this. This should never happen. If they can't get it right, it needs to change. It needs to change.
You know, Jonathan, I think it's important to keep in mind that the system has evolved here in trying to recognize this obvious issue with food contamination. If you go back 10 years, there was no thresholds for anything. There was a situation in Mexico and other countries where hundreds of athletes were testing positive and getting 4-year bans for meat contamination. Ultimately, they did do a threshold for clenbuterol 2 years ago that is now in place. And on June 1st, they actually just did a threshold for the substance that Ajay Wilson tested for 4 years ago, which USADA handled, thankfully, and she got a no fault. But looking back, if USADA wasn't on that case, I don't know what would have happened. I represented her too. But Zeranol is now, there's now a threshold for that one. But there is an accounting in the documents for this substance. We just believe that it wasn't properly followed. There's a lot of deference to the labs to get this right. And these are judgment calls by these lab directors. There's supposed to be harmonization. Every lab's supposed to report it out the same, but you know, I don't think that would have happened in every lab. And also, this lab was supposed to get a second opinion and they didn't. It's not required, but it's strongly recommended that they seek a second opinion as part of the B sample analysis and put that second opinion letter into the B sample analysis. That was never done either. So this was just one lab director making the decision on their own to ruin Shelby. And that's how it happened.
Alex Azzi.
Hey, thanks so much. I have 2 questions, if that's okay. I want to make sure in terms of the timeline, you said that you went to CAS to force the charge. What was the timeline that would have been in place had you not gone to CAS for that?
There is really no deadline for the prosecutorial entity here, Athletics Integrity Unit, to actually charge an athlete. The rules say they must be charged within a reasonable time. It's not really clear what that means, but conceivably an athlete could be provisionally suspended for a year without being charged under the way the rules are written. We came up with we filed an appeal that had never been filed before under a specific rule. And I basically said they're not complying with the rule, which mandates an expedited procedure. And therefore, we're asking them to issue a decision, notice of charge, to drop the case. And ultimately, on the day that they had to respond to Cass on that appeal, they charged her.
And then a follow-up to that, how does the process with the AIU work differently or similarly to USADA? Like, are there different steps or timelines involved?
I mean, everybody's following the same process, but a process is only as good as the people that are implementing it. And I feel like USADA's approach is, to me, different than the rest of the world, and I say that in a good way. I have enormous respect for the lawyers and the scientists that work for U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. In my opinion, they do things the right way. They're the leaders in the world, and I feel very strongly that if they were handling this case, they would have handled it differently and understood the situation, how it was not clear cut, and USADA wants to get it right.
Gordon Mack.
Hey, Gordon Mack here from FloTrack. I guess this is for anyone, coaches or Shelby. How has the other athletes on BTC handled this news? I guess they got the news way back in January, but what has the past few months been like for the teammates of BTC with this news of Shelby dealing with this doping situation?
Shalane, you want that or you want me to do it?
Sure. Yeah, Shelby, you can chime in too. When Shelby found out, she notified Jerry right away, but she did happen to be with some teammates at the time of the notification. And as you can imagine, finding out that kind of news, she obviously was upset and confided in them. So there were only a few women on the team that knew of Shelby's circumstances all these months. We just wanted to protect her, and just even the thought of someone potentially thinking that you're cheating, we wanted to protect her, and she's an innocent person, so we didn't want a reputation that wasn't genuine to be out there. So we did not share with our team fully until literally just when we found out the news on Friday. So as you can imagine, we're a very close-knit team. We're like family, and it's been very, very difficult for everyone. They care tremendously about Shelby. She's like a sister, and what happens to one of them happens to all of them. So it's been obviously a really difficult last couple of days for everyone, but it's only because we care so much about Shelby.
Yeah, I just want to speak on that a little bit. I definitely, I know it's been hard on everyone, especially since, finding out in the last couple of days. And I've been honestly floored by how supportive and just how everyone wants to fight right alongside me. I feel extremely loved and cared for, and that's probably the only silver lining of all of this. I think it's definitely been the most, stressful and broken time of my life, and to have my teammates, who I consider to be my family, right there alongside with me, standing with me and fighting with me, and my coaches and my family, and that's meant everything to me. So I just want to thank them for doing that.
Eric Bowl.
Thanks, Emily. I guess this question would go to Jerry. This is Jerry. When you mentioned, obviously this, it's broken in the fact that it shouldn't have happened to Jerian, it shouldn't have happened to Ajay, it shouldn't have happened to Brenda, obviously, and it shouldn't happen to Shelby. As Paul said, USADA's got a pretty good system going, but what role should USADA play in informing WADA to be people need to get their their house in order a little bit more, because this is happening to way too many athletes, prominent athletes, clean athletes from our country.
Travis has been up there Travis has been out there. Sorry, Jerry. Is it
No, go
okay if I speak for- Travis has been out there speaking on behalf of athletes in this situation, and I commend him for it. He's very public in his support for, you know, this kind of situation, that it shouldn't be happening. He even does this in foreign countries. I mean, Travis spoke about Shayna Jack, who's a swimmer in Australia, who's about to get a 4-year ban, and in similar circumstances. And Travis went on the equivalent of 60 Minutes in Australia to defend her. So there's not always, the system does not always see eye to eye on everything. And there's a lot of tension between WADA and USADA, as is, you know, obvious with all the stuff related to the money in Congress. I mean, all this stuff is out in the open. And sometimes I think part of that, American athletes sometimes get treated more harshly by the European federations. I'm not saying it's unique to just track, in all sports. And I think, you know, I think it's unfortunate.
Jerry, did you want to say something?
Now, Paul said it best. That's exactly right.
Okay. Okay. John Gault.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could ask Paul what the exact concentration of nandrolone that was found in Shelby's urine was.
Yep, it was for when you adjust her urine for specific gravity, which is the way you do it. She was very dehydrated, and it was her first urination of the day. It was 5 nanograms per mil, which, just to explain the way, how low that is, normally, if it's above 15 nanograms, which is still really low, it's an automatic adverse analytical finding. Anything above 15 is an automatic adverse analytical finding. This GC IRMS testing only comes into play at these extremely low levels of 15 or below. So her 3 markers in her urine, John, and no matter what the AIU says in response, they can never get around this. Her 3 markers were all consistent with borofil consumption. It says in the technical document 10 or less, she was 5. It says that her delta carbon value, and I can explain what that is without trying to go too sciencey on everyone in a second, but her delta carbon value, which is between -15 and -25, if you had this happen from a boar, was -23. And the ratio is 5 or below typically for pork, and her ratio, as I said, in her B was 3.9. I even put up that little chart that was done as part of a WADA study that showed that. And we had other studies showing that the synthetic ratios were 7 and above uniformly. And her ratio again was less than 4. All that's consistent with borofil. And I think it was scientifically impossible to exclude it. And that, in my view, that's why it had to be reported out as atypical, because if it could be either, the lab documents mandate an atypical finding.
Steve Soprano.
Hi, Steve Soprano from Let's Run. Just earlier you mentioned a possible appeal to the Swiss federal court. I just wanted to ask if that's something you're definitely pursuing, and what the timeline and process looks like for that.
So we have to think about that in terms of, we're going to have to get a Swiss law firm on board with that. Only a Swiss lawyer can handle that, and I'm definitely not a Swiss lawyer. So, you know, we're just still processing everything. Certainly that is her option, is to do that. But we have to wait probably until the reasoned decision comes out to reasonably have a chance to appeal, because the Swiss court isn't going to know the reasons why. So, you know, that process could take a while, and, you know, there's the opportunity to get an injunction from the Swiss Federal Tribunal. It happened in the Jose Paulo Guerrero case in 2016 before the World Cup. You can go back and look at that case. He was a Peruvian soccer player who got a ban from the cast, and then the Swiss Federal Tribunal gave him an injunction. So there are options Shelby can pursue here.
Kara Goucher.
Hi, I have one more question for Paul. Paul, we were at an anti-doping conference a couple of years ago and this topic came up.
I remember.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I mean, Jerry was able to spit off 4 names. What will it take, and how would it take you, WADA, to update this policy? I mean, what would have to happen within WADA, you know, so that this policy of holding people accountable, I mean, like, I feel like USADA has changed. Do you have any indication or idea of what would have to happen to make WADA change the way they look at these findings at such small levels?
Well, first, that's a great, I mean, just to say beyond those 4, I've had just in my own practice over 20 of these in the last 2 years with food contamination. And there's many, many others around the world. I wish we could all look to the UFC program. Jeff Nowitzki, who was the doping cop for years with the US government, brought down Lance, everything else. Jeff went to the UFC, realized this was an issue, and they've implemented meaningful thresholds on these kinds of cases, and they operate that system with USADA. This would never have happened in a UFC case. What will it take? I don't know the answer to that, Kara, because there's so many players involved in the WADA world. And, you know, a lot of them are open and out there saying, look, this is the reverse of the system that we understand, that our criminal justice system is based on the Blackstonian ideal, which we all learn in law school, which is that I'd rather, you know, have, 1,000 guilty people go free than put one innocent man to death. That's the American sort of bedrock principle of criminal law. That is not the way it is with anti-doping. You're assumed guilty. The strict liability standard is that way, and the burden shifts to the athlete. And, you know, the Jerry and Lawson case is reviled in the WADA world because Jerry had the audacity to actually be innocent and prove it. They hate that case. You know, they talked about it in this case. So they don't want athletes to have rights. I mean, I don't understand why, because in my view, the system is weaker when innocent people get banned. It just doesn't make the system stronger. But that's the mindset.
Alison Wade.
Shelby, where do you go from here? Are you going to keep training hard? Are you going to take a break? Like, how are you looking forward? And are you hoping for a Hail Mary or something like that? And also, will you be watching the trials?
Yeah, I've kind of been trying to take it one day at a time, trying to be in the moment and find little positives throughout the day. I don't really know where I'm gonna go from here. You know, my mind's been everywhere. I want to keep training. I want to be able to come back. At the same time, my heart's broken and I feel extremely betrayed by the sport and this whole process. I don't trust it anymore. So as much as I want to come back, I also don't know if I could. Yeah, I don't know where I go from here. Might just drive home back to Iowa and be with family. I want to watch the trials. I would love to watch my teammates run and cheer for them. I think that'll be very difficult, but I want to support them the same way they're supporting me. And I'm really, really sad that they have to, you know, also go through this with me. And in some, you know, this is some of the most important races of their lives. And I feel so bad that they have to deal with this. It's not what I want for them either. But again, I feel extremely fortunate that they don't seem to care and they're just here for me. Feel very grateful about that. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I don't have a solid answer. I'm just trying to take it one day at a time.
All right, we're going to take a couple more. Betsy Riley.
Hi, Betsy Riley from NBC. Just a question for you, Shelby. Could you take us back to December 15th? And for people who have never experienced it, just explain how the sample was taken or what you remember from that morning.
Yes. So I had my window set for 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. I had stayed the night at my then boyfriend's house, and we were woken up at 6 a.m. Got tested. You know, to take you step by step through this, they ring the doorbell, you get notified, you let them in, and start filling out paperwork, and then you provide your urine sample with a doping control officer present. They watch you give your sample. Then you pour it, you make sure everything's, you know, not opened or anything. And then you pour your sample into an A bottle and a B bottle, and seal it up, put it in a box, and then typically seal that box. And everything was normal that morning. I had no reason to think that this would be any different. Yeah, I think we were joking around with the doping officers like it was just another drug test. I had no reason to believe that, like I said, that this would be any different. And after that, I think, I went back to bed and that was it.
Johanna Gretschel.
Hi, Shelby, was this your first positive test or had you ever failed a test before?
No, this was my first positive test. I've never failed a test. I've never even missed a test.
And let me just chime in one other thing. The way that this substance, the oral nandrolone, works, it's very, very fast in terms of the way it metabolizes from the body. So anyone that would have taken it would have known that, and they could have easily moved their window. Obviously, this did not happen, but if Shelby had taken it, all she would have had to do is move her window from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. and she would have evaded being caught. That's how quick the stuff moves in and out of your body. In fact, the window in which it's under 15 nanograms, it came out in the hearing, is probably less than 30 minutes. When you take an oral nandrolone supplement, your level goes up to about 100,000 nanograms very quickly. And then extremely, almost as quickly, it metabolizes out of the body. And it's out of your body within 12 to 14 hours. In fact, nobody has ever been caught taking an oral nandrolone supplement that they could actually identify. 99+% of people who get caught taking nandrolone are doing it by injection. And the reason is because you have to be an idiot to take oral nandrolone. It doesn't actually help you at all. Nandrolone is a steroid that you take over weeks and months by injection to build up strength. You'd also have to be an idiot to take nandrolone as a distance runner because it would never help you. It just makes no sense.
All right, we're going to take 2 more questions. Kevin Sully.
Yeah, on that same topic, Paul, Jerry brought up Ajay Wilson and Jaren Lawson. What's the difference? I mean, is it just a matter of the substance being different in terms of the punishment here, do you think?
No, I mean, the difference with Ajay's case is that USADA handled it. And Jarian's case was vigorously contested just like this one. And in that case, I mean, I represented Jarian, so that was a vigorously contested case that we won. And this was a vigorously contested case that we didn't win. I mean, I can't tell you why that happened. Cases are unpredictable in terms of the panels and in terms of the outcomes.
Doug Binder.
This would be for anybody, I guess. Is there a feeling that Shelby faced additional scrutiny by the doping agency, partly because of how fast she ran last summer and breaking records?
I don't think that was part of it. I mean, this was a regularly scheduled out of competition test. In fact, she had been tested several times in November. Before that was negative, then was tested several times in January after and was positive. I can't remember the exact number, but it was like Shelby has been tested since 2016, probably over 100 times.
I would say the top athletes, top 10 in the world, get tested about every 2 weeks, whether it's USADA or WADA. So you basically know every 2 weeks you're going to be either providing a blood sample or a urine sample. And in Shelby's case, she's a top 10 athlete, but any athlete that's top 10 in the world will be under those same type of protocols of every 2 weeks.
Okay, last question, Johanna Gretzel.
Oh, sorry, that was a mistake.
No worries. I think that we're gonna call it there. Thank you all for coming. I just want to say in closing that we ask that everyone please respect reaching out directly to the other Bowerman Track Club athletes ahead of the U.S. Olympic trials. The athletes feel very passionately about their teammate and they support her in this process. They'll be releasing their own statements on social media. If you have any questions, I ask that you please wait to speak with them in the media mix zone or you reach out to their athlete representative for comments. That concludes our press conference. We thank you all for coming.